Welcome to Trending in Education. Mike Palmer here. Super pleased to be back with one of the original gangsters, one of the original founders of Trending in Education. Brandon Jones is back on the show. Brandon, welcome back to Trending in Education.
Thanks, Mike. I'm so happy to be back. I loved my time here, have been occasionally been back at it, and happy to be back at it today.
Yeah, so you were, for those who don't know, you were a regular, progenitor.
Progenitor? I was a progenitor, I think. Yeah.
And you're in favor of janitors.
I was pro. It's pro custodian. Actually, that's what the nice people call them today.
That's the correct language these days. But was in for the first three years really of the show on the regular. Pretty much every week we would get together and talk about the future of learning and education. Since last July, you've been more semi-regular, but still getting your perspective on this stuff. For those who like Brandon from back in the day, I recently did a 2020 prediction show, which got some nice uptake, and I thought there was some interesting stuff to talk about now. You're now more squarely in the behavioral health lane, which is super relevant on a number of fronts, but still staying tuned into what's emerging in technology, media, consumer electronics, education, learning, you name it. And we wanted to talk about a couple articles that got our wheels turning. One out of Fast Company, which talks about, can AI ever rival human creativity? Here's what the science says. Really interesting article by Tim Schweisfurth and Renee Chester-Godescheit, who outline a lot of the recent research around artificial intelligence, human intelligence, and spoiler alert, the prognosis is somewhat good for human creativity to stay relevant, stay ahead of artificial intelligence in the next, say, 5 to 10 years, which is kind of the time horizon we're looking at. And then the second article, which we also looked at, was about a futurist in Oregon named Steve Brown, who put together his take on the technology trends, the emerging capabilities that are going to make the next 10 years more disruptive in terms of the changes we'll see than the changes we've seen in the last 40 years. So we're about to lean into the 2020s. People are getting futuristic, looking, say, 5 to 10 years ahead, 2030 Farsight. We talked a little bit about. I thought they're a nice foundation. We'll share them out. Hopefully our listeners have a chance to read up on these either in advance or while listening to the show. But yeah, Brandon, if we're thinking about these two articles in this context, maybe specifically thinking about it in terms of what it's going to be like for us in 2030, how are we going to relate to emerging technologies like AI and everything else? What are your initial reactions to these two articles?
Yeah, I think that both are interesting. I do have a hot take on the Fast Company article about AI and creativity, which I'll save, but just stay tuned. Keep listening.
Yeah.
I thought one of the interesting thrusts in this article was about how AI, even if it can't compete, and I'm going to come back to that in a bit, but even if it can't compete with human creativity, can accelerate or enable human creativity. I think this gets into some of the topics that we've talked about often on this show is, the fact that AI for X is going to change X and basically all X's. And thinking about, today already, how technology enables creativity, whether you're talking about something that's sort of on the nose like CAD, computer assisted design, or other tools and technologies that are used in really almost every creative pursuit today.
Right.
I think that is not artificial intelligence enabling, but thinking about how AI might help human creatives, I think is really interesting.
Yep.
The prognosis, as you said, is that John Henry is still going to be the steam engine here, sounds like, for the next period of time. But, that the steam engine, John Henry riding the steam engine might go farther than John Henry on his own 2 feet, or Jane Henry for that matter. So, there's I think interesting thoughts. I know we want to talk about the application to work. We're going to come back to, and don't forget my hot take.
My God.
But, that was one of my takeaways is, and I think you do a good job of this in life, Mike. It's not an either or, it's a both and here. And I think both anding AI plus human creativity, I think that's going to unlock a lot of potential for those humans.
Building on that and sort of leading into the other article, it is interesting to think about the role of the human in the system in the next, say, 5 to 10 years. And I think it's going to be increasingly difficult to be a human who isn't playing with her head up and isn't thinking about what will be job relevant and what may not be. If you've been good at, following orders and accepting best practices and doing routine tasks at scale, you're going to be right in the front lines of the fourth industrial revolution, and you may wind up being a casualty if you're not thinking about, okay, what will the landscape look like? Because you want to learn the right skills so that you can continue to earn and be relevant and not be subjugated by robot or human overlords. But also, you want to think about what skills do I want to develop now if Steve Brown is in fact right and the next 10 years are going to be as disruptive or more than the last 40. Tactics that had worked throughout a 20, 30-year career may no longer work. And to me, that's what's super interesting about the two articles in relation to one another is, how much can you adjust your mindset and become more adaptive, flexible in your thinking, hungry for new skills and competencies, because that's where growth mindset really does come in, where if you don't see yourself as a finished piece of work whose skills and competencies have crystallized, and instead you see yourself as someone who is fluid and dynamic and responsive to the ecosystems that are evolving around you, it is a pretty exciting time. You're going to need a lot of help to sort of navigate the complexity, play with your head up, but I think it's a pretty interesting context to be thinking about training and educating humans. And that's what generally makes me gravitate to the future of work. But I think you were making the point when we were prepping, which I think is great as well, is like, it's really a future of everything, and to think about this narrowly through the lens of future of work may be limiting too. So I think it's useful to think about the future of commerce, the future of leisure, the future of politics, whatever, the future of X, to your AI comment earlier. But any thoughts on the Portland Futurist article, Steve Brown?
Yeah, well, there is a list, and our longtime listeners know I love a list. I'll maybe read it for the listeners here in just a second. But just to build on something you were saying, Mike, about it's an exciting time. I think it's also the upside to the downside of AI for X is going to eliminate a lot of people who are doing rote tasks in X. There's never been a better time to retool, reskill either.
Yes.
Right? Now you have to, this is growth mindset and grit, and it's easy when faced with adversity. It is easier to sort of drop out than to, sort of fully lean in. I think, we need to have sort of the psychic fortitude to be able to, this is sort of the growth mindset and grit side, to be able to challenge ourselves to move back up a learning curve. But there are better tools for moving up a learning curve today than ever before. Mm-hmm. Right. So, I think I've talked on this show before about my grandfather who worked at Ohio Crankshaft for 30 years and he was making crankshafts. It was a well-named place.
Wow. You make a lot of jokes about that.
Yeah, probably.
Yeah.
But, if that factory had gone under, like maybe he could have made camshafts. But if he was even trying to make typewriters, I don't know, like something else that was mechanical a machine shop, that would have been really hard for him. Like the tools to skill someone up were just very difficult. It's sort of, not that far removed from sort of artisanal experience where you would, serve under someone and learn from at that time, probably mostly him or her.
Yeah.
Like today you can reskill easily. So I think what I would encourage our listeners, and I hope you do read both of these articles, but I would encourage you to think about how this is going to affect you, but then also how you can take advantage of some of these emerging trends and thinking about expanding your skill set, capability, hireability through the lens of the future of work. So
I think that's a great point, and we should get into the list in a second. But it makes me think about both the concept of learning transfer, like the idea that something you learn in one domain ideally can be applied when you broaden your learning to a new domain, which is sort of the idea of like, if you're, a philosophy student who then gets into data science, you're going to have some unique perspective there that someone who maybe went purely engineering route was studying data science the whole way, they're not necessarily going to have the full depth of experience that you will. And that works in the other direction too. Elon Musk, friend of the show,
Friend of the show. Yeah.
Come back too. So we're back on the pro Elon phase. But he's notorious for his ability to transfer learning, and his idea, at least there, is that getting a depth of understanding of engineering in particular, there are some concepts that can be abstracted from that make it a lot easier to pick up subsequent domains. And I think that's why it's important to play with that longer time frame in mind, because when you're investing your attentional energy into learning new skills, best case, you're going to learn things that will have a longer shelf life. And worst case, the case to avoid would be spending a lot of your attentional energy to learn skills that are going to rapidly expire. So like, that's where like right now, learning how to be a trucker as a human, probably not the best use of your time, when instead you could learn how to be a product designer or an engineer, or insert job here. And then even if you're thinking about the trucking industry for whatever reason, if you love trucking, there will be plenty of jobs. What's been fascinating to me as I've dug into this a little bit more is that humans are so flexible in our intelligences, that our general intelligence, that when we don't have time or resources to train the AI to get it good, we'll send humans in to kind of fill the gaps, because our technology takes a while to be trained. This is one of the reasons why the creativity article was interesting to me, because it was basically saying making the lateral connections, demonstrating the generalized intelligence is something that AI is going to be slow to adopt. That's actually where humans are quite good. So, you could either be someone who rapidly acquires skills knowing that they're going to be replaced by subsequent skills. I think that's part of it. The other thing is, you always be learning is no longer a choice. It's really just the reality. You have to continue to learn. But then I think on the other side, trying to identify the abstracted capabilities that are going to have the longest term viability. And that's where, to me, being creative, being a collaborator, providing like differentiated service, really leaning into your humanity, understanding where the AI is going to get better and where it won't. Another thing that's really interesting that came up in the Fast Company article is the idea that humans will trust less solutions that they know are designed by AI, which speaks also to sort of like John Henry on Top of the Train, which also I'm imagining the cartoon animation to accompany this. But like, if you can figure out where do I layer in my uniquely human capabilities to the solution design that is going to leverage AI, that is kind of like a next level of design thinking that I think many of us can adopt. And I think that's something that we're trying to communicate out as part of this show. Do you want to go through the list, Brandon? Do you want to outline?
Yeah, I'd be happy to. And then there are a bunch of things in what you just ran through that I'd love to come back to. But
Sure.
the list. So again, this is from the Steve Brown article, that the next 10 years will see more innovation and disruption than the previous 40.
Mm-hmm.
I want to come back to that statement too. But based on all sorts of things, but 5 specific technology related advancements, developments that he calls out specifically. So they are artificial intelligence, blockchain.
Yeah.
We're a fan of the blockchain on this show.
The blockchain,
IoT, Internet of Things, and sensors.
Mm-hmm.
4th is maybe there's 6. I think there might be 6. Counting is number 4. No, 5G networking and satellite networks, autonomous machines, and then the bonus one, augmented reality. He does say ultimately augmented reality. That's ultimately suggests that's coming later in this next decade. But
yeah,
those 5 things, I don't know if it's worth talking through any of those in any detail. I think the regular listeners of the show know what all those things are. But do we want to hit a beat on any of them, Mike?
Yeah, I mean, are there any that jump out at you as either surprising? I think we were saying he he didn't seem to leave anything out that was super critical. He didn't talk virtual reality. He said augmented, but those kind of are neighbors. So I think you kind of scoop in the virtual when you talk augmented. Was there anything that you would expect a futurist, an Oregon futurist like Steve Brown, to include there, or you think it's a pretty good survey of the technologies that are emerging that will demonstrate the transformative nature of the next 10 years?
Yeah, I mean, I think the one that I was surprised not to see, and maybe you could shoehorn this under 5G, although it's a different technology, is quantum computing. Quantum computing, when you think about 10x in computer speeds, I think that there's an obvious application. Like that means Fortnite's going to run faster on your machine. Right. But like the real capability is for things like autonomous machines, especially like autonomous vehicles. The difference between a half second and a much smaller fraction of a second might mean that industry can exist or not. Right. So the quantum processing is maybe the one that I was surprised not to see. I will just say, I think 5G, which is going to allow, so that's 5th generation cell networks. So I think that the layperson might think 5G is just a way to, can you hear me now better, right? It's just about mobile connections. And it's not about that, but it's also about all of the other IoT, the T, right? It's about the Internet of Things, all the things. Those faster connections, and it's like 10 to 100x faster than 4G, which most people know is LTE.
Yeah.
That's going to enable a whole category of, or within cross categories, a whole next level of connections to happen.
Yep.
So I think that oftentimes the sort of limiting factor on change is speed.
Yeah, Moore's law. Yeah.
Moore's law is speed of connections, right? And that if you think we can do a lot today through the medium in which we're recording this very show, just wait until tomorrow, I guess is his point. So that was one that I think artificial intelligence. Maybe we can talk about others, but artificial intelligence, blockchain, autonomous machines. Maybe that's one worth coming back to. Some of these are pretty well known, I think, by our listeners and people at large, but and there are a couple of these that require maybe a little bit of additional, more expansive thinking than what the most immediate application to a daily consumer of things might seem like.
Yeah, and I like the angle on quantum computing as part of the mix too, because what was striking to me was how those 5, let's call them 6 technologies, how they might interrelate, which is why anything that is sort of like a step change in processing power is going to open up opportunities. Same thing around sensors and the Internet of Things. Like those, the relationships between and among these emerging capabilities are going to allow for smart design thinking. That's what I keep coming back to. Like people who are really thinking about how the whole ecosystem works, how the human agent will interact with the complexity of this emerging world, and how that human agent is not a passive lean back on consuming the broadcast media. Instead, I think it's a more of an engaged model, which ultimately I think there is a little bit of like you want to be on the engaged side of that model, because I think the risk is that there will be more of a passive consumer aspect to human experience that I already see, which is sort of like you're almost abrogating your own humanity to just consume the spectacle. And everything that I'm reading is indicating that if you play with your head up and challenge yourself to be uncomfortable, creative, productive, generative, regardless of your age, regardless of your background, you'll have your own function that ideally is accelerating in a positive direction, in line with all these technologies and external things that are going to be accelerating in a positive direction. In a lot of ways, we're going to be defined by our ability to change. There's that old, I think it's Bill Taylor quote, are you learning as fast as the world is changing? There's an element of, and I liked where you were going with this before, where like, if you lean into the tooling that's available to you, granted, we don't have the matrix downloads into the back of our head yet, but like if you lean into what's emerging around you, you can learn at accelerated rates. We're already learning new things at rates that are much faster than even 5-10 years ago. And then if you think about the force multipliers in the technology set that's evolving that you're talking about, we are entering into a golden age for a learner, which is the positive note. The negative side is if you don't lean into some of that golden age, you may wind up in sort of some stagnated danger zone. I generally try to stay away from stagnated danger zone.
Yeah, I think that's probably it's a pro tip for all the listeners out there. Stagnated danger zone. I was thinking just maybe one other thing that I might say is missing from this list, and then a broader point about it is
and a hot take.
I haven't forgot about the hot take, but from the list,
yeah,
is the just natural language processing and audio engagement, voice engagement rather with machines. And I think when you think about the machines over human history, like our first engagement with machines was sort of a full body engagement, right? Like think about a pulley to pull a heavy stone up, like you're using your whole body. At some point you started using your fingers, like once we got to typewriters, right? And then it moved from fingers to thumbs, right? When we started to go mobile, and now like we're interacting with more machines more often just through, something that's scanning our face and unlocking our iPhone, or something that's reading our thumb to unlock a device, or something that is, hearing our voice and in a very natural way interacting with us. And so I think one of the things that maybe I would call out the natural language processing as a big enabler for innovation in the future. And it's not brand new, but it's still in its early stages, I think. I think that more generally, the interfaces between humans and machines are going to continue to become more elusive.
Yes.
Think about like a Fitbit that sits on your wrist and does all that biometric reporting. Like, does that really feel like a machine? And that machine is actually reading things through your motions of your body, through your skin, et cetera. I think that's going to become even more so the case. We talked about centaurs before, humans plus robots. And I think some of us who are old enough, I put myself in this camp, like still have like this sense of robots or our earliest imaginings of robots were like from like 1950s sci-fi, right?
Danger.
Yeah, exactly. Stagnating danger zone, Will Robinson. If you think about human interfaces with machines today, and really tomorrow especially, it's going to be very different from what we've experienced, those of us who have a few decades under our belts, and certainly those who imagined robots in like the 20th century. It's going to be very different.
Yeah, it was interesting when you were talking. I was thinking about interfaces too, because I remember reading someone maybe 5-10 years ago, a while ago, and he was a futurist. I had to find the credit, but he was basically calling the 21st century the century of the interface, which I thought was an interesting, big idea. But if you think about how those interfaces are evolving, how 10 years ago we were just starting to realize, the screen on this phone could become a way in which I could interact with the world around me. And that defined a 10-year era. I think it's likely that new, more elusive, to use your language, more subtle, stealthy, streamlined, elegant interfaces will emerge so that, things can move more at the speed of thought. And, speech does. So I do think it's an interesting one to put out there, although some of us, our thoughts move passion, but hey, that keeps us ahead of the robots.
That's right.
So I think we're coming up on time for this show. I believe there was a take.
My hot take. I'm going to say one for each. My first is not super hot. Just the on the Steve Brown article. As a futurist, I would say this to Rohit too. Rohit Bhargava, friend of the show. You kind of, if you're in that business, you kind of got to be in the rate of change in the future is going to be greater than the rate of change in the past camp, right? Because it's a less, not just clickbaity, but it's just a less interesting thought piece if you say the rate of change over the next 10 years will be exactly what we experienced over the last 10 years. So anyway, no real shade thrown. My hot take, which is not shade on the Fast Company article, the fact that human creativity is going to outstrip AI creativity, which is sort of the human in his corner gets at the bell, gets the win in this article. It's a very human centric point of view. Mm-hmm. So for millennia, human creativity we have been the consumers. We humans have been the consumers of that creativity by and large, right? I wonder if at some point your point of reference might shift, right? What if AI is better at creating things for machines than we are? Right? Because you can imagine a learning AI that knows better, frankly, what its needs are, or the needs of the sort of Internet of Things connected machines. And that's so one of the examples in the article is the Post-it note. Like maybe AI isn't developing the next Post-it note, but maybe they're developing the next breakthrough in computing technology, or in something that is going to be more applicable from a machine-centric point of view than a human-centric point of view.
Right.
So,
right.
I'm still hashtag team humans, although I heart bots. Yeah. But one, to my point of like the sort of, there's going to be a semi-permeable membrane between those two in the future, and then two, not sure that the human hegemony that we've had is necessarily going to persist for all that much longer. And so I think thinking about things from a non-human centric point of view at some point is going to be something we need to do.
Yeah, that's super interesting because there is a whole movement around human-centered AI as almost like a counterpoint to the traditional AI, which has sort of assumed that the system you design for is almost a pure AI play, which is kind of like what you're talking about, where this gets back to the design thinking, but like if your system is a blend of human and artificial intelligences, artificial agents, I think the design thinking is different than if the humans are not part of that system. And that's also where the sort of the ethics and the next level thinking that gets to the right place, where you're like, what are we comfortable allowing AI to own with some independence and autonomy and perhaps superhuman capabilities? And then where is it right to be humanist in our thinking about designing these systems? That's what Yuval Harari, who I've said it a few times on the show, he talks a ton about this stuff. Stanford, Fei-Fei Chang out of Stanford has the human-centered AI. What's interesting is there are a lot of educators, thought leaders who are beginning to try to wrap their heads around this stuff. And I think we're at least reading what they're writing.
Yeah.
Participating a bit.
I think we're participating. I think what we've done, one of the things that we've done, and I don't intend to speak for you, although I think I know you well enough after having done this with you long enough, Mike, but I think we take a glass half full look at this, right? And so, yes, things are changing, and yes, people need to be aware of them, but yes, this is going to unlock new potential for all of us, right? And so I think that there's, through this show, I think in part we're trying to just bring the conversation to folks, but at least I am, and I think you are too, also trying to take a generative and positive look on this, because I think better things will come from everybody, including not being sort of riddled by anxiety. If you're thinking about, okay, so let's say this is a reality. How does my role in it change, and what can I take advantage of it to make that future more awesome than the past?
Yeah, I agree. And the related point, I think, is that mindsets can be taught. And I think in addition to growth mindset, being curious, being flexible, adaptable, being humble about your own knowledge, but still open to acquiring new things. I think those things, that's why social emotional learning is such a big deal, because I think a lot of those things, they're subtler to unlock, but they are teachable, modelable. And yeah, when you start thinking about the future, you start thinking about learning and all that stuff, I think it naturally gravitate to this stuff. So yeah, super interesting. Any parting thoughts, Brandon, on this topic?
I typically say no and then say something, so I'll just now cite what I typically do. Yeah, I mean, I'm excited. We're trend spotters, trend traders, trendsters, right? I guess I'm just excited to see how this all develops, to participate in it, to keep my head up and my eyes open, look around me as it's happening, and think about applications to to work, but just also to life. So I'm excited, and hopefully we'll get a chance, Mike, to keep on jamming on this with you over the years to come.
Awesome. Brandon Jones, permanent friend of the show, one of the founders of Training and Education. Always great to get your perspective, and we'd love to get our listeners' perspective too. One of the best ways to get that perspective is you subscribe to the show, you tell your friends about it, you start having conversations with us and with them. And we're trying to provide a curation function for you so that you can help filter some of the crazy out in the world. We try to do that every week, once or twice, 3 times when we're doing nice. Thanks again for listening. Thanks again to Brandon for being on the show.